Hello, investors and traders out there. The markets are crashing. The S&P 500 closed down 3.18%. It is down even more after hours. The NASDAQ here sold off 4.38%, one of the hardest hit indices. Taking a look at the small caps here, the IWM is down 2.87%. So across the board, markets are crashing. We have not seen this much of a sell-off or a correction for quite some time, going back to February or even March.
You kind of saw this week coming, but this is probably in your mind just a precursor to something much worse.
Yeah, I think it's a wake-up call. It's telling us the fantasy is ending. We're going to have to get back to reality. You know, I don't buy this thing that the economy is strong. We've had 1/4 of 4%. Obama had 3/4 of 4%. He had 11 quarters of 3%. But on trend, the economy is weak and it's old. We're in month 111 of this recovery. They haven't abolished the business cycle. We're 8 months from the longest in history. In the next year or two, there will be a recession. Earnings won't be $160 a share or $170. They'll be $75. This market is massively overvalued, and people are simply getting in harm's way if they take the bait.
Once you take a hit like this, you leave all this money trapped above. People who bought in the past 3 to 5 months who now are underwater and would love in principle to get their money back. We're basically we basically closed the doors to something of a murder that just took place. It's not
with an alarming story about rising death rates among white adults in America. WSJ's special writer Betsy McKay joins us now to discuss.
Whereas changes were starting to occur, you know, before the mid-90s, but the opioid epidemic has definitely accelerated it. And then on top of that, you know, you have alcohol-related liver diseases, and you have suicide. Suicide and opioids are often tied. You know, it's hard to tell sometimes whether a drug overdose was intentional or accidental.
Right. Well, it's also interesting because these studies always look at race.
Medical mystery tonight after children across Minnesota came down with a rare illness that made it difficult for some to use their arms and legs. Symptoms include muscle weakness, drooping eyelids, difficulty swallowing, or slurred speech. Tonight, the state health department says 6 cases have been reported in different parts of the state. Health officials have now named the disease, but as one Minnesota family is finding out, there is little else they know about it. Here's Gordon Severson.
Yeah.
Ever since he developed a rare condition called acute flaccid myelitis.
It's been very scary.
That threw his parents for a loop.
Well, you know, the challenge with this illness or syndrome is that there are a lot of things that we don't know.
Along with public health officials who don't even know what causes it.
How is this treated?
In this case, there isn't a specific treatment.
Mom, can you take these out?
Its symptoms are similar to polio, with weak or paralyzed limbs, slurred speech, and difficulty swallowing. But that's where their similarities end.
This is
New cases in Minnesota all popped up in the last few weeks, and now we're learning that Colorado has seen 14 cases so far this year.
This morning, doctors in Minnesota are still stumped. They're trying to figure out what caused 6 kids in the state to recently come down with a rare condition known as acute flaccid myelitis, or AFM. The illness is a scary and potentially deadly puzzle health officials have been trying to solve in recent years, now settling into a pattern doctors hoped wouldn't repeat.
We were curious as to what was going to happen this year, and unfortunately are starting to hear reports that cases are occurring again in 2018.
This serious polio-like illness, mostly impacting children, has no cure. According to the CDC, cases peak every 2 years. First grabbing attention in 2014 when 120 people were diagnosed. The spike in cases continuing every other year across several states. 2018 has already seen 38 reported cases, with 14 in Colorado and the half a dozen cases in Minnesota since mid-September.
You know, this could take a really quick turn for the worse, and we might not be able to take him home.
The cause of AFM is most often linked to viruses. Symptoms can include muscle weakness in the arms, legs, and neck, drooping of the face or eyelids, and trouble speaking or swallowing. In some cases, it can lead to paralysis or death.
States of emergencies all along the coast, the flooding showing no mercy. Our crew flying with Customs and Border Protection is surveying the damage in every direction. ABC's Eva Pilgrim with the view from above.
Tonight, the devastation of Hurricane Florence from above. Entire towns now underwater. People using boats to get around. Heavy rainfall and relentless storm surge leaving neighborhood after neighborhood surrounded by high waters. Customs and Border Protection taking us along on one of their helicopter missions.
This storm is dumping an incredible amount of rain in this area. Surrounded by water.
These boats, thrown from their docks, found near railroad tracks, even washing up in wooded fields.
Right now we're on a search and rescue patrol, so if we encounter anybody that needs assistance, then we're going to go and assess the situation.
Farther south in Wilmington, dozens of cars filled up flooded parking lots. Today, Governor Roy Cooper flying with the Coast Guard to survey the damage, warning residents of the floods still to come. Tom, this is the problem. It just keeps raining, adding to the already swollen rivers, which keep rising. Tom?
Eva Pilgrim reporting for us tonight.
The death toll from Hurricane Michael rose to at least 13 people today in the wake of the storm's devastation across 5 states. 5 are known dead in Virginia, including a firefighter, another 4 in Florida, 1 in Georgia, and 3 who died in North Carolina. Search and rescue teams combing through the catastrophic destruction in Mexico Beach, Florida, have found more bodies, but they have yet to be added to the official death toll. William Brangham is in the Florida Panhandle and has this report.
What was a vacation destination now looks more like a war zone. Destruction in the small town of Mexico Beach is near total. Homes and buildings wiped completely off the white sand beach. Entire blocks are now just piles of rubble and debris.
Total devastation. Every piece of property, if it isn't got something wrong with it, it's leveled. Things that were on the beach are now on the other side of the street.
Some people here thought they could ride out the storm. Then came winds at 155 miles per hour, driving an enormous wall of water right into town.
I noticed that things seemed to be moving outside, and I thought that trees were going by, and I realized it was our house. It had been broken off the foundation and was floating around, as were both of our vehicles.
The late great astrophysicist Stephen Hawking believed with more than 100 billion stars in our galaxy, the odds are pretty good that aliens exist. And he's not alone. Every day, people across Canada report seeing a UFO. And while most can be identified, as CTV's Janet Dirks reports, some things just can't be explained.
I got it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
What the hell? That strange light in the sky is one of 1,100 UFO sightings in Canada last year. According to the annual survey released by Ufology Research of Manitoba, there are at least 3 such sightings in the country every day.
UFO reports are still a thing. People are reporting them in greater and greater numbers every year.
Montreal is Canada's UFO capital, with 74 sightings reported last year, followed by Toronto, then Vancouver. It's not that these cities are on an extraterrestrial highway. It's a matter of population, says the report's author.
If a tree's falling in the forest, you need somebody to hear it. So if there's a UFO in the sky, the more people around to see it, the more reports you get.
None of the sightings matched the drama of the X-Files.
The truth is out there.
But something was out there, according to 10 campers in Quebec who reported a triangular object that hovered and then flew off. One of them drew the scene. In Oshawa, a wildlife photographer captured an odd-shaped disc in the sky. This scientist says people should be critical, but still open-minded.
There's a few that really just get me scratching my head saying, what could it have been?
The survey says of the 1,100 sightings, only 8% are unexplained, and that can be whittled down to 1% of so-called high-quality unknowns.
In fact, none of these cases, shout that aliens are here. But what they do say is that people are reporting things, and maybe science should take a closer look at some of them.
Since the survey began nearly 30 years ago, more than 19,000 Canadians have reported seeing something strange in the sky.
Above us that passed us like 30 seconds ago.
Number 71 Papa Golf negative.
Okay. Something. A UFO.
President Trump asked a number of his top foreign policy advisors last summer about the possibility of invading Venezuela. Trump aides vigorously pushed back against the idea, as did fellow Latin American leaders who allegedly told Trump they did not want to see a U.S. invasion. CNN White House reporter Jeremy Diamond joins us now.
These nationwide exercises are called Sovereignty 2017. And they're President Nicolás Maduro's answer to what he calls the biggest threat of foreign aggression to Venezuela in 200 years of independence.
I feel prepared, but we need to prepare even more.
This is for the fatherland.
Here at Venezuela's largest military academy, civilians from all over Caracas are being taught the basics, from manning an anti-aircraft battery, to assembling an Uzi submachine gun, to learning to use a rifle.
This year, President Maduro called on hundreds of thousands of civilians to be trained and armed in defense of the revolution. Now, Donald Trump's assertion that he will not rule out a military option to restore democracy to Venezuela has given Maduro the perfect pretext for this.
Venezuela already has a 230,000 strong army and almost 1 million militiamen and women.
Venezuela is holding 2 days of nationwide armed forces exercises and has called on civilians to join reserve units to defend against a possible attack by the US. Warplanes, tanks and hundreds of thousands of troops in reserves were deployed along with civil militia members. Venezuela's display of military might comes in response to US President Donald Trump's threat of military action 2 weeks ago and new financial sanctions announced on Friday. In a national address, President Maduro condemned Washington for using economic and financial measures to impose its political will over a country. State TV images showed Venezuelans young and old entering military reserve registration centres, but there was no evidence of registration beyond the most ardent supporters of Maduro's Socialist Party. Trump's threat of military action has played into Maduro's hands by supporting his oft-repeated assertion that the US is waging economic war on Venezuela.
Says one of its military air bases has been attacked.
Russia has once again warned the United States not to take military action.
North Korea's nuclear and missile capability has posed the toughest foreign policy dilemma.
Third World War is unlikely.
No, I don't believe there'll be a Third World War. Probability of this is very high.
We are not going to have a Third World War.
We are currently witnessing a cold Third World War. I hope not. The Syrian conflict is already a global conflict.
The North Korean leader is so close to getting a nuclear capability. This is perhaps the first period of the biggest powers simultaneously rubbing right up against each other.
Western leaders believe they're more strong than Russia. Russia is an adversary.
So many conflicts that have so many international actors involved. This is a new kind of war by proxy.
The great powers are all being led by real nationalists, and of course that does make it difficult for any given country to back down in a crisis.
You have multiple players, some of them could upset the apple cart unintentionally.
Them misunderstanding us, taking democracy an essentially weak and inefficient form of government.
From both sides we have propaganda.
The breakdown of those barriers in terms of acceptability of mass destruction.
If Americans kill Russian soldiers.
Cutting off of communications, either through the cutting off of cables or through the cyber attack of satellite systems.
If the American government starts pulling out US personnel from the Korean Peninsula, that would be extremely dangerous signal.
The international community has largely ignored the Syrian conflict. If we continue to sit and watch, this conflict is going to grow and come and hit us without us even realizing. Though the Middle East is an area of conflict, there are many civil society actors working on the ground. It is these people who will be the pillars of peace when the time is right.
We have the United Nations, we have arms control agreements of the kind we didn't have at an earlier age. All of these institutions are sort of a restraining web.
I think there are more likely to be proxy wars, and the burden will be borne principally by others than by the great powers themselves.
It's more likely to happen if we imagine it's impossible.